In my previous video, I mentioned near the end that even mathematics is not objective, that it's subjective, and someone asked me if there would be a follow-on to that claim, so I'll try and keep it as short as possible. Let's start off with the way we perceive the world. So you're going to perceive the world in your own head, and there are some very clear psychological examples of this. For example, the fact that we see the colour magenta even though that colour doesn't actually exist. It's blue light and red light hitting the back of our eyeballs, and evolution has ensured that we don't average the two and end up with a green colour, because green is safe whereas blue and red can be dangerous, so our brains invent this extra colour, magenta. So colour's subjective. Now if colour's subjective, and that's a fairly fundamental thing for us to perceive in the world, imagine how complicated it gets if you move on to things such as mathematical systems or languages or things like that. Now, looking at a language, take for example a community that appreciates poetry. That's a subjective thing. A poem in one culture may be seen as the most beautiful poem ever, and in another culture may be seen as a piece of trash. You can see that when there are advances in, for example, poetry or literature or art. Often the old guard doesn't get what the new guard is so excited about. So nobody really argues that literature or poetry are subjective. However, they are structured according to a rule set, and the rule set is something that is socially adopted. So carrying that over onto mathematics. Now, I know there's this gut feel that mathematics is objective, that it must be a reality of the universe out there that we're tapping into, but it doesn't actually matter whether or not there is a Platonic reality of mathematics, because the fact is that firstly you're going to communicate with it in some way through your mind, so it's going to be your subjective reality that's looking at it. And secondly, mathematics is something that is done by a community of mathematicians, and if you do a mathematics degree, one of the things that is happening to you is that you're becoming encultured into that community. You're learning the standards that it uses, the notation, and these things are all arbitrary in a sense, in that it's a decision that has sort of collectively come to by the community. Individuals push it along in certain directions, but the fact is that if you are doing mathematics that is not appreciated by the rest of the mathematics community out there, and never is appreciated by that community, then it doesn't really matter. You're not actually a mathematician at that point anymore. Now, going on to Ken Bodnar's maths problem. So he posed the question, see, I can't remember the exact numbers, but he posed the question, there is a dog show where there are 45 dogs on display, and there are 36 more small dogs than large dogs. And the question is, how many small dogs and how many large dogs are there? Now, if you take 36 away from 45, you end up with 9. Then you halve that, so in order to have 36 more of one than the other, one needs to be 4.5 and the other one needs to be 40.5. Now when you look at that question, you immediately start thinking, well, half a dog, that doesn't make much sense now, does it? But it is technically the correct answer, or the answer that you're supposed to give. But again, that's a form of a community understanding, when here you're actually sort of moving away from the concreteness of the problem into abstract mathematics. There are, however, many other interpretations you could have. For example, you could say, well, half a dog doesn't make sense. Maybe there's one medium-sized dog. Maybe that's what the half indicates, in which case you have 4 large dogs, 1 medium dog, and 40 small dogs. Now that makes more sense. But then you can look at the problem again and say, well, there's no actual statement how many medium dogs there have to be. There could be 3 medium dogs, in which case the answer will be different and still equally valid, or 5. And if you can have fractional dogs, why not have negative dogs? When you look at the history of mathematics, you'll find that a lot of the advancements in mathematics come by people originally thinking that something didn't make sense. Negative numbers don't make sense. It doesn't make sense to subtract 9 apples from 5 apples. Later on, mathematicians then say, well, let's just give it a go and see what happens. Oh, it's interesting. Now, interesting is, again, a subjective thing. What makes something interesting is not an objective, interesting reality out there. It's something human, and it's in a sense something cultural as well. So I guess I've kind of skirted around a whole bunch of things, but basically what it boils down to is the reason why I think that mathematics is not objective and that there is not one true answer is because it is this social activity. And the fact is that mathematicians happen to be very good at the social activity of manipulating numbers and dealing with logic and stuff like that, whereas poets are very good at dealing with the system of language and the rules of poetry, rhyming, vocabulary, cadence and structure and stuff like that. And in a sense, those two activities are actually surprisingly similar. It just happens to be that they have different applications. So I've kind of gone on a bit longer than I intended to. Happens to be a topic that I was looking at when I was doing my PhD, and it is a philosophical thing. So of course, as is usually the case with philosophy, it's interesting but ultimately pretty useless. Still, what's wrong with a bit of fun every now and again? So that's it for today. See you in the next video soon. Bye for now.